So this is the Atlas top by Stitch Witch Patterns, and I'm going to create it a little differently. I'm not going to make a facing for it simply because I think that takes longer. Instead, I'm going to line the front bodice, and that way it won't be transparent if you're using a thin fabric, and as I don't plan on wearing a bra, I think it'll be better if I line it. So this is what it looks like finished. I've done the front. I have switched out the middle horizontal darts. I've just rotated them into the neck, so they're neck darts instead. And I have top stitched along all the outside seams. And then this is what the back would look like. So what I've done for my second one is I have the back pieces made. I've sewn them wrong sides together, turned them out, and then ironed them flat. And I've made a second bodice. The one in green tape is the lining, and this will be the face fabric here. I have finished my darts and I've ironed them down. And I also stage stitched the arm side and the neckline. I found when I made the first one, my neckline stretched out because I neglected to stay stitch it. So it is now stay stitched. So the next step is going to be sewing the front seam together on both the lining and the face fabric, the front fabric. However, on the lining, you're going to leave a 4-inch gap lower down on the seam, and this is so when we sew it all together, we have to turn it right side out. So we want to leave a 4-inch gap along the lower part of the center front seam, and that's what I'm going to do now. And for the front of the bodice, I'm sewing these right sides together and also right down the center front. The lining, I'm leaving that gap. So this is a seam allowance of 5/8 down this seam. After sewing those center front seams, the next step is to press them. I like to press them open, and I like to press them on a ham because there is a curve to that center front seam. So I just give it a light press just to keep everything in position. And yeah, I do that over my tailor's hem. And I have the darts going to the outside just because there's a lot going on in this neck area. However, you may have the horizontal darts in the middle if you're doing it as the pattern has it. And then I will just open up the center front seam of the lining and open up where that gap is too, just so it will be easy to just give it a few hand stitches once we're all finished with it. But if you iron it now, that will make it really easy later. This is my lining with the green tape, and you can see there's my gap there to pull the whole front through once it's done. I'm just going to iron this a bit. It's rather wrinkly. The next step is taking our front bodice right side up and taking our back pieces and aligning them. Firstly, make sure that you lay your back pieces out as you would have them on your body, looking like this, and then you're essentially going to move them right on top of your front bodice. It's going to be right sides to right sides. So right side of the bodice up and right side of the back pieces facing down, although probably it won't matter because you may have used the same fabric on both sides. And what we're going to do is align the shoulders in the middle of the shoulders seam of the shoulders of the front. So I'm going to pin that so it's very evident, and I'll show you on camera. So I've left 5/8 of a seam on either side of the back shoulders. I'll do a close-up there. So you can see there's my 5/8 of a seam on either side. And now we're going to make a sandwich, and we're going to take our lining piece and put this right side down on top. So you'll have the front bodice right side up, the back bodice wrong side up, and the lining bodice wrong side up, with the back bodice sandwiched in between. And again, I'll just line that up, and I know that my shoulder straps for my back are right in the middle. So this is my sandwich, the lining wrong side up, the back pieces pinned to your shoulder seams wrong side up, and your front bodice right side up. So the next step is sewing across the shoulder seams at 5/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do that now. So I've sewn my shoulder seams, and I've just taken my picking shears to finish off those edges. You can serge that or zigzag the seam edges, whatever, however you want to finish your edges. The next step for this bodice is finishing the arm side and the neck. So pinning the neck together is your next step, and sewing that at 5/8 of an inch. As well as the arms, you're going to pin them together and sew them as well at 5/8 of an inch. And sometimes, even with your best of intentions and stay stitching, sometimes one arm can be a little bit longer than the other and stretched out a little bit. So this is your time to ease it all in. So I always pin the outside edges first and then make my way into the middle. And there might be a few little bubbles, which I will just ease in. As well, with this particular pattern, I'll show you, you do have to pin, when you're doing a lining, pin away that back strap so you don't catch it in the seam allowance as you're sewing. So pin it down, and then pin your arm sides together, and so all these edges are sewn at 5/8 of an inch. And the trick for getting two sides to sew together well without puckering, and when one side is maybe stretched out a little bit, is I use this little tool. You can use a pencil, but you can keep pushing the fabric forward to help it feed through, or you can use a walking foot, which would really do the job very well as well. But I just use this little tool, and I just go very slowly. And I just kind of push that upper fabric and help to feed it through. I'm just going slowly. And sometimes I'll lift up the presser foot, readjust everything, and keep feeding that top fabric through to fit the bottom fabric. The trick is slow is your friend. And just make sure you don't catch the back in this seam. And I'm keeping to my 5/8 seam allowance here. And with the back shoulder, you want to feel where it is, and you want to go right up next to it. I'm going to draw a line so I can feel the edge of that shoulder is right here, and I'm going to go right up next to it. This is where you don't have to obey the seam allowance. You just feel for it and go right up next to it so you don't have any kind of gap in the shoulder. same on this side. I'm going to feel where the edge is and mark it right there. And I'm going to sew right up there. And again with the neck, some areas could have stretched out on either side, so I'm just going to take my time and feed the fabric through. Just rotate my project a bit to get right on track here. I also want to make sure my darts are facing the right way, so give that a little check if you need to. Feeding those through. And I have lined up my center seams to be on top of each other with a pin, so they should be very, very close when you've finished. Again, my darts are nicely stacked on top of each other. This is a perfect example where you can see the top has stretched a little bit even with the stay stitching. So I'm going to use a pencil, some kind of tool to push that fabric forward so I don't get a bubble or a pucker. And here I can feel my shoulder seam. I'm going to make a little mark where the shoulder seam is right next to it. I'm going to sew right up to that. And back tacking, and then my final seam here, this side, and same thing, nothing but consistent. I'm going to feel where that shoulder is and just mark it so I know, and I'm going to sew right up to it. And seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. Just pivoting a little bit when you need to. So I've sewn all these seams. Now I'm going to go ahead and use my pinking scissors and just get rid of this extra seam allowance. Once you've sewn the neck and the underarm seam, turn this right side out and make sure you like how your shoulder seam looks. Sometimes things can go wonky there. Sometimes it's best to unpick an inch or so and re-sew it. The trick is getting right up next to that back shoulder. And once you're happy with everything, then finish these seams as you want. And this is what I mean. When you pull it to the right side, you want to make sure that those seams are together. There's not like one side is out a bit or anything like that. Like it just looks nice and smooth and continuous from front to back. And if you don't have pinking shears to make this quick and easy, because these are all curves, you do have to notch them. So every inch or so, put a little clip into the seam allowance to allow the fabric, once it's turned right side out, to lay flat. So you can either use your pinking shears or just put a few clips in. And when I talk about that, I mean just taking your scissors within the seam allowance and just every inch or so putting in some clips. Once you've clipped all the edges, now it's time to turn it the right way and to give it a good press along all those seams. And after ironing my shoulder seams, I can see what I was trying to show you. You see how it's nice and joined there, but it's a bit out here. So I'm gonna go back in and just sew that a little bit closer so I don't have that piece right here. This is what I don't like, this extra bit, compared to this shoulder seam, which is nice and smooth on both sides. So I'm going to go back in and just correct that. And you can see when you come in a little bit closer that the shoulder seams become very continuous. So I've corrected that little bit, and now I'm moving on. So next step, after you've pressed all the seams that you just sewed, if you haven't finished the bottom of your dart legs, now is the time to do so. So I usually leave tails on my darts here. So I'm just going to tie all these tails up and then we'll continue. The next step is looking at the edges that you've just sewn. If you still have, or if you have some stay stitching that is visible from the outside, you do want to remove that now. So just take a quick glance. Most of my stay stitching was encased, but I have a little bit right here I'm going to remove. So just check your garment. The next step is a little bit tricky, but not too bad. So we're going to be sewing the side seams up, but we need to tuck the back pieces into those side seams. So you need to open up the bodice and again make that sandwich, but this time you're opening it up just a little bit. So you have the right sides together, the right side of the lining, the right side of the bodice, and the shoulders or the back together. And what you're going to do is simply put the back as you would see it when you're wearing it, and you're going to take the back piece and put it right along the side seam, starting right underneath the underarm. So you're going to pin it along the side there, and then same thing with this side, pin it along the side, and then flip the bodice lining back over top. So you should have 3 side pieces. You should have your front bodice face up, the back lined up in that seam, and then the lining over top, and the lining should be wrong side up. I'll show you once I get it pinned. So this is what it's going to look like. Your lining is going to be face up, and you have your side seams pinned with your back piece pinned to that side seam inside. So what I suggest is basting these sides down first and then trying it on, and make sure you have the fit you want. You can tighten it up a little bit, especially as you go towards the waist. Because the back is open, it almost acts like a zipper or a button, so you have a little bit of playroom there to get it on and off. But just be cognizant, you do need to be able to get it over your head and shoulders. So the next step is basting these side seams. So even the simplest of tops, like this Atlas top, really it only takes about an hour to sew. But I will say that even the simple ones require a fair amount of fitting. I made 2 different toiles of this top, and I did switch out the center darts, like I said. but I also reshaped the back. I took 2 inches out of the back because I'm a little bit short-waisted, and I did make my final one. And even with my final one, I realized that it was a bit wide at the sides. I wanted it to go into the waist rather than out, so fitting things need to take place. And so with this second version that I've made, I like now how it fits on the side. It's going to cut right in, but you can see in the center front here, it is a little bit loose still. So that's why I love a center front seam. I'm just going to go and take it in a little bit. And the other thing to look for with this particular top, especially if you don't plan on wearing a bra like myself, when you lift up your arms, just to make sure that it's long enough under your bust. So do the arms up trick just to make sure it's long enough. And if you like the way it fits, then we're going to go on to the next step. I'm just going to take in this center front seam slightly, and then I will be right back. The next step is turning the garment inside out. You're going to tuck the whole thing inside the front bodice and remove anything that you have showing you which one is the lining and which one is the front. I ended up putting a piece of ribbon, just sewing it to the hem, so I knew which one was my lining. So you're basically tucking the whole thing in like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew across the bottom, straight across. And you want to start sewing right at the bottom of that side seam. So right here, you're going to start sewing. You can sew straight across. Sometimes I just slightly go down right at center front and then slightly go back up again. You can draw a line in first before you sew it, or simply start right where that back seam hits and go straight across. So once you've sewn across your bottom hem, you can go ahead and finish that edge however you like. And don't forget to finish your side seams as well. So I'm just going to use my pinking shears for all of that. So I'll just quickly do that. And then we're going to turn the whole thing right side out through that hole in the center front lining. And then we're going to press the whole thing. And there's only one more step to do, and that's to top stitch all the way around the top and sew by hand up that little hole in the center front lining. So I've done that. So now I can find that hole, which is right here, and just kind of carefully turn the whole thing out through that hole. Carefully. And yeah, we're almost done. We're just going to give it a good press and top stitch. So once I have turned it all out here, I made my hole a little small, but there we go. So now let's give it a good press all the way around. So your top should look like this. It should be pressed, that bottom edge that you just showed, the hem, should be pressed. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start on the side seam underneath the arm, and we're going to top stitch all the way around in a continuous, all around the back edge, come back up, go around the neck, all along the other side, and then come down and top stitch all along this hem that you just sewed, and then you're done. I do like to note when I'm top stitching, I do use my walking foot because you're dealing with multiple layers of fabric. It just stops it from puckering or making any bubbles. Once you've gone all the way around, top stitching, using a walking foot is helpful. I top stitched at a stitch length of 3.5. That's my standard top stitching length. And you're finished. You have a great summer top meant for the heat that is completely finished inside and out. And you can also make this top reversible by just using a different fabric on the inside. That's it. Done. Go celebrate.